Greetings YouTube, Alan Luber back, and I'm here with a Fai deck tech. It's been a while since I've done a deck tech, and Fai was the first deck tech I really posted on this channel, I believe. And ever since the Stubbies banned, I've been, playing around with different things like combo Fai without Stubbies, Kadachi Fai, like a bit of a hybrid Fai, and just a lot of random things. And even though I don't think Fai is in a great spot in the meta right now, I figured I would show you this somewhat unique take on Fai. And it's nothing too crazy, but I thought it was interesting enough to make a video about. And so this is my orange chicken Fai list, and you'll soon see why I call it that. But yeah, let's just get right into the deck tech. But before that, please like, comment, subscribe. I will be uploading some gameplay with this deck soon. It's nothing crazy. This is kind of just a meme deck that I play for fun, but it's like still pretty solid in my opinion, even though the concept is a little funky. So let's start with the equipment. Of course, we have Fai, our hero. And we have Searing Emberblade. This is just an Emberblade deck. There's no Kadachis, none, just Emberblade. So it leans more into Draconic synergy, but it's not fully Draconic with things like Flame Call Awakening and stuff like that. So let's go into the basic equipment suite. We have Mask of Momentum. This deck is a mask deck. I do have links in the sideboard, but I don't really plan on running it too much. I think you can run it versus Oldhim in like a control Oldhim list, but assuming you don't know what the Oldhim player is playing, I feel like Mask is a pretty safe bet to run no matter what. Next we have Flamescale Furnace. This is also my go-to. This deck currently doesn't run Tunic or Blossom of Spring. Those cards were great in combo Fai when you can like Belittle or Art of War and Stubbies into like a huge 30 damage plus turn. But with Stubbies banned, I think Flamescale Furnace just adds consistency to the deck. Next we have Tiger Stripe Shuko. This card was basically the equipment that everyone started to use after Stubbies was banned because it's obviously just the best slot. It's Blade Break 2 and it gets a good amount of value. But what I found when I've been playing other builds like Kadachi Fai, I wasn't consistently getting Tiger Stripe Shuko value in my turns. So this deck I originally made to basically get as much value off of Shuko as possible. And then lastly we have Snapdragon Scalers. The deck does run cards like Snatch, so having Snap is pretty important. And then the only sideboard equipment for now is Tide Flippers. I decided to go Tide Flippers over Null Rune Gloves because I think Shuko, even in the Icelander matchup, does provide a good amount of value. So I decided to go with Tide Flippers. It can still attack react things like Lava Burst or Salt the Wound, and it's still mostly fine. And the Mask of the Pouncing Lynx, I'm like debating on cutting, but it's in there for now. And that's it for the equipment. I believe that's 7 total equipment. Yep. So nothing too crazy there. Pretty standard, I would say. Moving on into the deck. Let's first get the reds. So this is a pretty standard Fai. I'm only running 1 Phoenix Flame. I'm not running cards like Inflame or Flame Call Awakening because it doesn't lean too heavily into that huge combo turn aspect. So I just like having 1 Phoenix Flame for consistency. Drawing into 1 usually is pretty bad. So 2 is, or just the 1 Phoenix Flame is fine. Moving on to our starters, we have the 3 Rising Resentments, the 3 Brand with Cinder Claws, and the 3 Ronin Renegades. These are all pretty standard. Nothing much to say there. They're all 0 for 3 go again. Ronin Renegade obviously being the worst because it has no effect, whereas Brand and Rising Resentments effects actually do matter for the most part. Like Brand, I do run non-Draconic, a good amount of non-Draconic cards, so being able to turn them Draconic usually is impactful for the Phoenix Flame. And then Rising Resentment is honestly just like the MVP of the deck. My deck runs more 1-cost cards than I would say a normal combo Fai list runs, and because of that, being able to get the on-hit of Rising Resentment on Chainlink 2 is actually really impactful. So yeah, those are the generic 9 starters in the Phoenix Flame, pretty standard. Moving on, we have other starters. We have the 3 Spreading Flames, and we have the 3 Mounting Angers. So Spreading Flames is decent. At worst, it's usually 1 for 4 if you can at least play your Phoenix Flame. If you can make it 1 for 5, then it becomes pretty good. But I'm not too big on the card. If I were to replace a card, it might be this one. I might look into options like Soaring Strike or things like that. Mounting Anger I think is really good. It's 1 for 5 if they don't block it, and then if they do block it, then you get value off of just forcing the opponent to block. And they're just Draconic starters, which are pretty important for the deck. You don't want to break a hand where you can't play a Draconic card. So moving on, we have 3 Belittle. So Belittle is interesting. It was originally in a lot of combo decks because you do things like Tunic or Blossom of Spring even. It can help fix your hands, but the problem was that when you pitch a blue to play Belittle and you get a blue Minnowism, you would have 5 extra resources, and Fi does not use those extra resources very well. So because of that, Belittle, a lot of people weren't in love with it. Some people cut it, some people kept it. The deck that I've built definitely wants to run Belittle, and you'll see why in a second. But yeah, it's pretty good, and it also gets resources for the deck, which is pretty important. Moving on, we have 3 Double Strike. Since this is a Mask of Momentum deck, having the Double Strikes are pretty important, or are pretty nice because they give you more chain length. It helps you hit Rupture. It synergizes with things like Salt the Wound, and it also gets value off Shuko, so you can come in for 1 and 2. And there's just a lot of... It's just a really great card in my opinion. You can also start with a Brand to make the second Double Strike, or the first Double Strike hit Draconic, and that usually is enough to get a Phoenix Flame with any leftover resources or stuff like that. Moving on to the conditional go-agains, we have 3 Lava Vein Loyalty and then 3 Blaze Headlong. So Lava Vein Loyalty is pretty good. You just need to have any Draconic card, Chain Link, and then it's 0 for 3 go-again, and it blocks 3, which is really big. Blocking is actually pretty important. And then 3 Blaze Headlongs, one of the best cards in the deck, 0 for 4 go-again. It's basically unconditional. There are so many red go-again cards in this deck that you shouldn't have a problem playing Blaze Headlong. There will be times where you will break a hand, but it's pretty uncommon. So moving on to the basically Rupture cards, I have 3 Snatch, and then I have 3 Lava Burst, and then I have 3 Breaking Point. So the Snatches are pretty self-explanatory. It's a really good card, a 0 for 4 draw card. Since this is a Mask of Momentum deck, you can put a lot of pressure on your opponent. If they block the 3rd hit and then you still end with a Snatch, you're still threatening a card draw. And if you have an empty arsenal, that brings a lot of value to the deck. Lava Burst, 0 for 5, 0 for 6 if you have Shuko, 0 for 7 if you have Shuko and Spreading Flames. Just an insane ender, also blocks 3. And then Breaking Point is the questionable addition. So Breaking Point's effect, I think, is really powerful. Being able to blow up the opponent's arsenal in like a race or against like a ranger or even like a guardian who like arsenals a crippling or something to disrupt you is like really big. And the issue with Breaking Point was always that it was very hard to get the resources to play it because you have a lot of 1-cost cards with like Spreading Flames and Mounting Anger already, and your sword costs 2, so having that 1 extra resource was not easy to do. But I think with this deck it works a little bit more because my resource curve is a little bit different from what you might expect. So those are the 9 red Rupture cards. And then moving on to the last red card, Blood of Drakai. This actually isn't mine, this is Oliver's. I'm borrowing it for this video because I don't own this card. He pulled it at Vegas and got it signed, which is awesome. So this card is pretty bad. I only put it in the deck for the memes. It's like okay into ice decks if they play like Channel Lake Frigid and all of a sudden you can like pay for all your cards because they all cost -1. But I think the dream is to just like play a Blood of Drakai into a Belittle or Blood of Drakai into Art of War, and then you draw into things like Breaking Point or Spreading Flames or Mounting Anger, and you just get to play all of them for free. So that hasn't happened to me yet in all of my games. Most of the time I draw this card with all cards that cost 0, so it's basically just a dead card in my hand that I have to pitch into Furnace. So yeah, it's pretty bad, but I'm just waiting for that one game where it does something insane and I get to brag about it. So that's it for the reds. I believe it's like 30 something. You can count on the fabdb link in the description. So moving on to the yellows. These are the 2 power yellows. We have 3 Artivores and 3 Salt the Wounds. So Salt the Wound is my basically 4th Rupture card. So I basically am running 12 Rupture cards, and that's kind of insane. But the more I've played with all these cards, it's like honestly fine because Snatch is like a semi-Rupture card. You can play it a lot of the times without needing extra chain links. You can play it by itself. So it's like a semi-Rupture card. But so 9 true-ish Rupture cards is pretty bad. But Salt the Wound is still a yellow, so it can still act as pitch resources. And it blocks 3, so I just think it's like a must-run, honestly. And in an aggro matchup where you need to push as much damage as possible, having Salt the Wound, along with like Double Strikes, Phoenix Flame, and all your other cards, helps you really push over the top. Art of War is pretty self-explanatory. It just enables you to have some insane turns if you're able to pull it off. A lot of times with this deck, I'm not necessarily banking on Art of War to like in my arsenal to win me the game off a huge turn. If it lines up, it lines up. Otherwise, it's still a yellow to pitch, is how I view it. And now let's move into the reason why I call this deck Orange Chicken. We have 3 yellow Rising Resentments, 3 yellow Brandwood Cinderclaw, 3 yellow Ronin Renegades, 3 yellow Lava Vein Loyalties, and 3 yellow Belittles. Now you must be thinking, that's a lot of yellows. And yep, if you're paying attention, there's only 1 slot left in the deck, and that's the 1 blue Minnowism at the very end. So the reason I call this deck Orange Chicken is because the Phoenix Flame is like a chicken, and then the deck is basically all reds and yellows, which means it's orange. So I came up with this idea when I was like, whenever I pitch a blue to play Belittle and I get another blue, I have too many excess resources. Like I never use them all. So then I thought, what if all my blues were yellows? And I thought it might be a terrible idea, but I decided to try it out. And once I tried it out, I actually found that this adds like a different level of consistency to the deck. So when I say consistency, I mean a damage output consistency. So if you draw a hand on an old Fai deck with 3 blues, your turn was absolutely garbage. But if you draw a hand with 3 yellows on your turn, it's actually quite salvageable, honestly. And being able to play these yellows is pretty impactful because Rising Resentment and Brand with Cinderclaw are actually cards you want the effects. Brand with Cinderclaw to like make something Draconic, or Rising Resentment to get a discount. Like there are a lot of times where I will start with the 0 for 3 go again red, like maybe like a Brand or like a Ronin Renegade, and I'll attack my second chain link with a yellow Rising Resentment. And what that does is the opponent has 2 options. They can either block this to stop the on hit, but maybe they're overblocking with a 3 block. And if they block my second chain link, I could very easily get to another 3 chain links, because getting to 5 chain links is not that hard. Getting to 6 is like doable, but it's not like consistent. So sometimes they'll want to block the 3rd hit instead, because usually Fai doesn't run any like attack reactions gain attack cards. So blocking the 3rd hit is usually pretty reasonable. But letting Rising Resentment hit lets me discount things like Belittle or Breaking Point, Mounting Anger, Spreading Flames, all of those things. So it's actually really impactful that I get to play more Rising Resentments that I actually want to play. And when you play a yellow to play Belittle, and you have 1 resource floating, you grab the 1 blue Minnowism, then you now have 4 resources. And I have found that 4 resources is like enough to do almost anything you want with this deck. There may be some turns where you might want 1 extra resource, but that's fine. There are definitely still hands where you do wish you had a blue instead of a yellow. For example, if you had a blue, or if you had a yellow Rising Resentment, 2 basic red go again, or let me clean this up for a second while I demonstrate this. So let's say you have a yellow in hand. You have, let's say a Blaze Headlong, let's say Mounting Anger, and let's just call it Brand with Cinderclaw, right? So if you had a blue, you would be able to very reasonably play this hand, because you could go Brand into Sword. Let me get my sword actually. You could pitch your blue, go Brand into Sword, into Blaze Headlong, or into Blaze, or you can start with Mounting Anger. But basically you can play your whole hand and swing with Sword if this was a blue. So now the issue is, now that this is a yellow, what can you actually do with this hand, right? So swinging Sword is still an option. You could still go like 4, pitch, swing Sword, come in with 3, come in for 1, and maybe you can arsenal this card. But what I have found is, for example, let's say this Brand with Cinderclaw was now a yellow Rising Resentment. So now I have different options, right? Let's say I have 2 yellows in hand and these 2 reds. So this is not an uncommon hand to see in an old Fai list. If these were both blues, you would be like, oh, this hand is okay, I guess, but having 2 blues always sucks. But having 2 yellows is like actually kind of serviceable. So actually, hold on. Let me replace this Blaze Headlong, because that actually doesn't work. 1 second. Let's get a red Brand. Yeah, red Brand with Cinderclaw. So you can play red Brand with Cinderclaw, and then you can play Rising Resentment on chain 2. And if they let this hit, then you can banish your Mounting Anger. It's now free. You come in for 4. Maybe they block, maybe they don't. If they block, it doesn't really matter. You'll come in with Sword anyways. And then you can come up with another Flame, and that's 5 chain links pretty easily, right? So the thing with this deck is that I found that it makes your bad hands that had multiple blues better, but you still see hands where you wish that one yellow was a blue for that extra resource. But I think this deck is honestly just funny to play. I don't even know if it's better than just running blues, but I feel like with the limited games I've played so far with this deck, there's never really hands that I think are like unsalvageable. Like I always have like something consistent pressure to put on, which I think is the main goal. And also all of these yellows count towards Shuko. So if you draw like a 3 yellow hand, you can still come in for 2-3-2, for example, and that's like not terrible. Or you can come in for like 2-3-3 with Emberblade, Phoenix Flame, maybe end with a Snatch or Lava Burst or Salt or something. And then Belittle also just like raises the cost consistency of this deck, running 6 Belittle instead of 3. This one acts as a yellow to pitch because most of the time you only really need a yellow. Sometimes you'll need a blue, but it is what it is. So you can either pitch it or you can play it, search out your Minnowism. You'll have 4 resources. You can easily do a sword shenanigans or things like that. So I think this deck is quite interesting to say the least. I wouldn't say it's like a meta deck or anything, but I like to just bust it out when I want to have some fun. And all the yellows is just really interesting. There's a lot of shenanigans you can pull. Let me show you another example of, let's say you have a Belittle, you have a yellow, and let's say you have 2 reds on a 4-card hand. Let's go Brand, and let's go, I guess you can do Lava Vein Loyalty. So let's see. How would I play this hand? So your options are, you can play, actually no, let's not take Brand. Let's take Ronin Renegade instead, because the effect will not matter. So you'll pitch your yellow to play a Belittle. You'll have 1 resource floating. You'll get your Minnowism. You can come in with Ronin Renegade for 3. And then, so now you can, for example, it's a little awkward, but what I like to do is, since you have 1 floating, let me get a dice to actually represent this. You have 1 floating, and then if you could like play Lava Vein Loyalty, Searing Emberblade into Phoenix Flame, and you'll have a ton of resources left over. But instead, what I like to do sometimes is I like to actually pay 2 to activate Fai's effect to get the Phoenix Flame. If I can find it. Phoenix Flame, where are you? Can't find it. Phoenix Flame. It has to be somewhere. I'm missing my little chicken. Okay, I'll just represent it with this. So if you pay 2 to play your Phoenix Flame, with Shuko, this will come in for 2. If this was a red Belittle, it would only come in for 1. And what happens now is you're threatening your mask hit on a smaller attack, which they can either block with equipment or block with whatever they please. Your other option is to just come in for 3 and let them full block it and get value. But instead, you can use your 2 resources to pay for that. And then now you can still come in with Searing Emberblade. And then you can still come in with another attack from hand. You'll have none floating, and then maybe you can like end with a Snatch or a Lava Burst or something. So once again, you get to, on a 5-card hand, it's not too hard to get 6 links. On a 4-card hand, I would say 5 links is more consistently what you're going to get. So a lot of times, players will either block the second hit or the third hit. They will rarely block the first hit unless they have a bad hand and they just want to start blocking out. But like blocking a 2-attack Belittle on chain 1 is like not ideal. So if they block the second hit, you can usually threaten another mass trigger. If they block the third hit and they let this hit, then you usually just get value off, putting a small attack like a Double Strike or a Phoenix Flame on the third hit. And then a lot of times this second chain link will actually be a Rising Resentment, which if they let hit, for example, can let you banish Mounting Anger, it can let you banish Breaking Point, it can let you banish Spreading Flames, and those are the basically 9 cards that you can possibly banish there. So yeah, this deck is a lot of fun. I find it more interesting to play than the old Fai deck, because the old Fai deck kind of just felt like you vomit your hand, you use all your equipment, and you see how much damage you can do. This one I would say is more interesting in the lines you can take, your resource management, how to sequence your attacks best, how to react to how your opponent is blocking. So I find this deck a lot more fun to play. I actually think a lot more about how my hands turn out. But yeah. And to wrap things up, I'm just going to go into a quick little sideboard. The sideboard is nothing crazy. It's honestly something I just put together real quickly. I have the one Razor Reflex. This Razor Reflex is what I would play if I wasn't running Blood of Drakai. Just the one Razor Reflex is like nice to get mass triggers and things like that. Adding more kind of ruins the consistency a little bit of the deck. And things like Ancestral I don't think have a place in the deck either. But yeah, if I took out Blood of Drakai, I would definitely just run a Razor Reflex. And then I have 3 Sink Belows. These are basically for the Guardian matchups. Having a Sink Below with your full fridge lets you like block out things like Spinal, which is very impactful. So having Sink Below is pretty nice. I have 3 Take the Tempos just because I really like the card, but honestly, I have no idea what matchup I would even put it in. I don't even think there's space for it, to be perfectly honest. So if you wanted your own sideboard space, I would cut these 3 cards for sure. 3 Erase Face. I only have 2 on me right now, but these come in for like Dromai and Icelander for poppers, and Viserai also. So, and then lastly we have Command and Conquer. This comes in for like Lexi, Dromai, and you can also sideboard it in like aggressive matchups as well to like have more disruption. But I don't recommend it too much. I kind of just like it because Lexi is a really tough matchup if you don't have Command and Conquer. And then Dromai having 6 poppers is pretty nice. People will say you don't need any poppers, but I don't know. I've just found that like if they play a Necria and I can't deal with it, and like I have off turns, then like they just start climbing back into the game, which I would prefer not to let them do. Because Mass Trigger is important, but it's like on average Mass Trigger is only adding like 3 or 4 damage to your turn. So stuffing a bunch of attacks into dragons is like okay, but it's not great in my opinion. So yeah, that's my sideboard. One other sideboard card that I would mention is definitely Findall Spring Tunic. I don't have it currently, but you could definitely make space for it. The Icelander matchup can be tough. No, it is tough than a regular Fai deck simply because you're running no blues and just a bunch of yellows. But having 6 Belittles does help a lot. Getting that blue on a lot of your turns is like really nice to be able to push over. And then also Blood of Drakai is actually pretty cool into Icelander because you can play through like Channel Lake Frigid or Frostbites by reducing the cost of your cards after Channel Lake Frigid or the Frostbite increases the cost. So that's cool. But yeah, that was the deck tech. I don't think I missed anything, but if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I could talk about a matchup guide, but for the most part, or let's talk about it real quick. Against aggro, like Briar and Viserai, I would say it's like pretty close, like maybe 50-50. Against like other decks that you can push out, like Dromai Ice or Dromai Dash, I would say you're favored. Icelander is slightly unfavored, and the Guardians are like going to be your hardest matchup if they're aggressive enough. Stalagmite definitely will cause problems for this deck. That one resource is like pretty big. But if they let Rising Resentment hit, you can always banish something and save it for if they try to Stalagmite you. So that's nice to know. And yeah, that was my deck tech. I'm going to be uploading gameplay for this deck, either on TTS or physical in the future. So please subscribe, stay tuned for that. And yeah, if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I always basically answer comments, so don't be afraid to ask anything there. And yeah, that was my orange chicken deck. And hopefully you guys try it out. It's actually way more, it actually works a lot better than I expected when I first put it together. So yeah, have a good one.